guys, welcome to the Booster Pack. My name is Rands, and this is the show where we unwrap the stories and crack the mysteries of collectible game history. And today there is plenty of history to unwrap because we have one of the most accomplished collectible game designers the history of the games have ever produced. That's right, this gentleman has for the last 27 years worked on over 24 games with collectible components, both physical and digital. But let me back up, because this guy entered the games industry with an independent company, but ended up finding himself at Decipher, one of the biggest collectible game publishing houses the 90s ever saw, and eventually parlayed that experience into working on digital collectible games, doing some of the most innovative and most inventive work that players of those games enjoyed by the millions. Now, through his work on collectible games, also, I should mention that he not only worked on the game mechanics, but helped discover some of the most dark corners of pop culture's biggest universes, giving us lore and characters that otherwise we may not have seen the same without him. Whew. All that is very impressive, but I haven't even mentioned yet his 2 Gamma Origin Best TCG Designer Awards and his Inquest Audience Award for Best Collectible Game. I am, as I said, incredibly impressed, a little intimidated, and so thrilled to be able to introduce to the program someone whom his fellow playtesters were so intimidated by, they gave him the nickname Devastator Chuck. My guest today is, of course, Chuck Kallenbach. Chuck, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing fine. I'm doing great. We'll tell you the story about Devastator Chuck. I wasn't really intimidating them. But anyway, here's my Origin Awards. Yes.
There they are. Wow.
You mentioned that. Yeah.
There
so that's
you go.
No secret for you. We'll talk about those later.
That's amazing. Well, I cannot wait to hear some of the stories that come out of those. And like you said, you've got a story there, but let's just roll it back. I love to start at the absolute origin story. You know, the secret origin like superheroes do. Where did you fall in love with tabletop games?
I was born at a very young age, and I was, as soon as I got tall enough to see over the table, my parents and my family were playing games. They were mostly playing canasta. Early on, I learned how to play chess. My sister and I played all kinds of board games. This was all before there were collectible card games, of course. So gaming, and especially card gaming, was something that I just grew up with and I thought was perfectly normal. So that was the start. I started running Tunnels and Trolls, I think, the tabletop role-playing game, the bucket of dice game, we used to call it. And then after that, I got into Dungeons and Dragons and ran Dungeons and Dragons for about a year and a half. And I've always said that everything I learned about game design, I learned from running role-playing games on tabletop, because it's all about balance. It's about motivation. It's about entertainment. It's about, you know, giving the players what they want. It's about telling stories. It's all there.
Yeah.
Then my first break into gaming per se, I tried to do some playtesting for companies like Avalon Hill used to say, we have an open call for playtesters if you want to playtest. So I playtested Iron Dragon.
Yep.
We started playing Traveler because I wanted to play Traveler, and I just sunk the island. And Traveler was awesome, and I worked on it, and we started to come up with homegrown supplements for it. And I met the creators at conventions, local conventions. So we had our own company, which was called Paranoia Press.
That's fantastic.
And that led to me getting my own sector in Traveler, which was awesome. I said, who's in charge of real estate? He said, I am. You want some? I said, yeah. So that was great. And I had played hundreds of SPI games, the board Hex war game. At one point I had 300. And I was in touch with them because I saw them at conventions. And they would be like, whenever I went to a convention and went to the talk with the designers, and they say, does anybody have any questions? And I go, yeah. And I ask a question, and they say, does anybody have a question? And then nobody would raise their hand. I go, I have another question. So I used to be like the guy asking all the questions. And then they would just look at me and say, Chuck, do you have any more questions? And I would go, yeah, I got a few more, yeah. So I learned a lot from that too.
So you go from obviously making these things, and you've done a lot of work obviously with RPGs and stuff like that. I'm guessing that's throughout the 80s in those sort of formative developing RPG years. And like you said, a lot of collectible games or a lot of any games are based on RPGs because there is that balancing component, storytelling component. Eventually, the industry takes a giant leap in 1993, and collectible games get introduced with the advent of Magic. What was your impression of collectible games when they first arrived on the scene? What was your very first experience you remember with them?
Okay. My very first experience was I went to pick up my comics at my local comic store, and the guy who owned the store said, "Hey, there's this new game. Look at this. It's got these cards, and look, there's elves and dwarves and things and dragons." And I was like, "I just sent my D&D island. I don't want to play this." And he's like, "Okay, thanks." So that was the end of that. And nobody explained to me at that point, exactly what was going on. But eventually I got a hold of Starter Deck, and I told all my friends, there's this new game where everybody has a 60 card deck and all the decks are different. And they all looked at me like, how does that work? So yeah, by the time Gen Con came around that year, I had a deck ready to go. I was ready to play.
So that's Gen Con 94, I would assume then.
93 was, it came out in 93. Was it at Gen Con in 93? Is that right?
That's correct. Yep. Magic was, yeah.
I was there, and I was there as I worked a lot for GDW at their booth. So I would get free tickets into the joint. And I also get you access to the exhibitor floor before anyone else. So I said, well, there's Magic the Gathering. In 93, they had one 10-foot booth, Magic the Gathering. And it was like 12 people deep all the time. And I was like, well, that's a big line, but I'll just come in early tomorrow. I'll come in at like 8 o'clock before the place opens. It was that deep at 8 o'clock in the morning. Never seen that before. But didn't get much product that time.
It would have been hard to.
Also, another Gen Con experience is at 94 when Jihad came out. There was a line that went all the way around the display hall and out in the other hall. It was just incredible. It was just a tremendous wait to get Jihad, which I loved.
Well, that was so interesting because obviously that was the first time that Gen Con gamers saw something that was familiar to them, because that was obviously Vampire the Masquerade coming out as a collectible card game. So obviously they thought, hey, we'll jump onto this. This is finally the one for, us in franchise Gen Con goers.
Yeah, that's another good story about my circle of friends, because again, before this revolution happened, I was playing Traveler. I was playing other role-playing games with my friends like Dark Conspiracy and stuff like that. I knew some guys that played GURPS a lot, all tabletop role-playing stuff. And I said, look at this new card game. Look at this. Isn't this cool? And they said, card games? I don't like card games. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but I love card games, and I always have. So, the fact that it was a card game was a big plus for me. I mean, it's portable. The games don't last long. Card games are great. Now, the turning point, I'm going to take this hat off because it doesn't fit. The turning point for me, my wife at this time was the manager of a local store in St. Louis that was called Games Crafts House of Stuff.
Yep.
The owner of the place, Dave Meisler, was friends with the guys from Mayfair Games. So he had them come up for a barbecue, and they stayed the weekend. And I went to Dave's house on Saturday, and they gave us some demos on some games, which was really cool. Games that hadn't come out yet. And they gave Dave a packet, and they said, find somebody to play test this. And Dave took the packet and he threw it at me, and he said, here, play this. You like games, like card games. And I said, yeah. And I opened it up, and it was a playtest copy of Star Trek CCG.
Which Mayfair had gotten from, obviously, somebody at Decipher?
Well, Darwin Bromley was involved in that. One of the guys from Mayfair. So that was the connection there. But yeah, it was on little bitty. I may have a playtest card here. It was on little bitty card.
That would be fantastic.
And there were a lot of question marks on the cards. And
TBA.
And I'd never gotten, I'd never seen playtest things with a question mark. And I saw there's one. There's a couple. I saw Darwin I went to lunch and saw Darwin, and I don't know if you can see these.
Wow, there it is. Yeah, that's amazing. So it's a personnel Klingon. Great, that's amazing.
Loyal to Duras. Yeah, his name is Larg. Yeah, and here's a guy. There's Burning Off Rasmussen.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. Oh yeah, there's one of those question marks. Fantastic.
They had question marks like right where these numbers were, which was crazy.
So what did that come with? Did that come with instructions or?
Yeah. Basically,
like,
before the internet. Well, this wasn't before the internet. Anyway.
Before the internet is what it is.
Yeah, because this was 1994.
Four. Yeah.
So like I was on the Genie service, which I'm sure nobody remembers unless they're old.
Yeah.
So yeah, you get a sheet of these and you make your own copies and then print them out. And same thing with the rules and start playing. So yeah. Oh, here's some more. I was looking for one that had a question mark right in the wrong place. And I asked Darwin, I said, what are the question marks? What am I supposed to use for that? He said, make it up. I said, okay.
So you were no stranger to playtesting things like RPGs, but this was the first time, obviously you're familiar with Magic, but this was the first time that you had to playtest a collectible card game. Poor tense for the future, of course.
Now at this point, we were keeping up with Magic very well. I mean, we started out with, here's my deck, which equals my collection. It's like, there's my deck. And very quickly, very rapidly, we said, this is a bad idea. And we made 40 card decks. And back then, if you want to have fun, play with a 40 card deck, no restrictions, no card limit.
Yeah, so that was the original rules for Magic. There was not the 60 card that we know today, not the 4 card limit. Before the DCI was sort of founded in early 94, that was the way to play Magic. It was 40 cards, whatever you want. If you wanted all play grats, go for it.
That's right. I played against a couple of those, and I beat them with my Leviathan deck, but that's another story. A friend got a whole bunch of Hypnotic Specters, and he said, come on, let's play a game. I said, okay, fine. Here's my usual deck. So we played, and he discarded a card, and he played, he discarded. And I had no cards in like turn 4 and never had any cards again. And then I lost. And he said, wasn't that cool? And I said, not really, no.
Wasn't that the Wild West of collectible games? Prior, when they thought rarity would balance a game.
I don't know what was going on there. But, Richard Garfield is a prince among men. He's a wonderful guy. And I understand those feelings that he had were very heartfelt. And he really thought that was how it was going to work. And it didn't work that way. So anyway,
it's adorable to see that. See what has come of it. His anti-rule got waylaid just because of the way that how scarce the product was, I guess, initially.
We never played with the anti. We played with fake anti. We would flip a card over because you might have a card in your deck that said blah blah anti. So but I've never played with anti where it would take your cards away. I'm like, no.
So let me just jump on here. I was just going to ask before we get back into Star Trek, like when you saw the line for Jihad, when you saw the 12 men deep at the WotC boost, what was your thought? Did you think that this is going to basically shift and shape the hobby industry moving forward? Or was it just, this is just a buzz fad thing?
I think everybody knew that something was going on here. And I think early on, people were like, what the hell is this? What's going on here? And then it was like, can I get a starter deck of that? Everybody wanted to see what it was, at that point, because it was quite mysterious. It was very hard to explain to people. Again, it's like we all have our own 60 card deck. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Interesting.
After that Gen Con, we came back, and I was part of a local game club, and they said, we're going to match it. And I said, that's great. And they said, we're not going to use these new rules, these 60 card, 4 card limit rules. We're not going to use those. And I said, I think I'll bring 20 lightning bolts and 20 mountains. And they said, we're going to use these new rules.
Degenerative environments certainly change opinion quickly, don't they? So let's jump back to playtesting. You've got this playtest pack. You've just been thrown it literally at a barbecue. You've thought nothing of it. You've went home and it's got Star Trek characters on it, which I assume you were familiar with the show at that point. Where did you take it from there? So how did you give your feedback about what you thought? Who did you play with? What was your first experience dealing with Decipher?
Played with my family, of course. My wife and son both play cards, play games, all kinds of games. They're always the first. I was able to convince some of my role-playing friends who were done pretty much at that point sneering at card games. I was able to convince them to play. It wasn't a whole lot of fun. That's the thing about it. You work for a game company, you play games all the time. And a friend of mine once said, yes, but they don't work. So if you like playing games that fall apart in turn 3, then this is the job for you. But it's work, it's not fun. So we'd figure that out, and we'd say, okay, I made a deck with this and this and this, and we tried this card, and this is what happened. I mean, just literal, write down the feedback and email it back to them. At some point I got involved with. At some point I got a rule book or something from Decipher.
This is before the game came out?
Yeah. I mean, So I remember going to Gen Con when the game did come out, which I think was 96 or I don't know, 95. I'm not sure. Anyway, and Tom Browlick was there. Tom Browlick and Raleigh Tesh were too. They were old friends of Warren, I think, and they were the ones that pushed him to get the big license. You need to get a big license, get Star Trek, and do this card game thing.
That was revolutionary. It was the first time a collectible card game had ever been based on a license outside of gaming, and it was a huge property, one of the biggest that the industry was so excited about.
That's right. Yeah. So Tom Browlick was demoing at that point Star Trek at Gen Con, and I walked up and I said, "Hi, how come my name's not in the rule book?" This is the way I greeted Tom, because the list in the back said, "and all of our many playtesters." And I said, "Well, why didn't you list our names?" And he was like, "I don't know. Tom's the sweetest guy in the world. The fact that that was the way I said hello to him was horrible. I should never have done that." So anyway, yeah. So if you ever play Star Trek CCG, you know that you can play one card a turn. This is first edition, of course. So there's a card called Red Alert, and when you play Red Alert, you can play all the cards you want. Now that sounds crazy, and it came from, and this was a design decision. We watched people playing the game, and they weren't playing very many cards every turn. That's the rule. That's why. So he said, we added Red Alert, and then he grinned really big, and I was like, okay.
Didn't test it. Yeah, I remember that being a formative card on those early Usenet forums that everybody would. It was a must include too, because it basically just gave you the game really, or gave you whatever you wanted.
It was like Time Walk, but take like 7 turns. It was kind of like that.
Okay, so you've pointed out there that there was some speed bumps in the rule system that the designers had left in Star Trek. So having come from Magic, which although it had its problems early on, what was your comparison? Because you really, other than Jihad, probably didn't have too much to compare it to.
I played everything else that was available then. I will admit that I don't think I've ever picked Galactic Empires, which was another one of the very early games. You're familiar with this, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I know it well.
And the reason is because I didn't think the art was very good. And I know it wasn't very good because a friend of mine said, I did some art for Galactic Empires and you can too. Just tell them and you can submit some artwork. And I thought, if they will take artwork from a schmo like me and they don't even know who I am, I don't think I want to play this game.
What's the old Groucho Marx quote? I don't want to be in a club that somebody else that would allow me to be a member.
Yes. It's kind of like very much like that. Yes.
Well, I remember Galactic Empires definitely has some refrigerator magnet art on it. Definitely some.
That was the big problem with CCGs. You know, if you had a wonderful idea, everybody's like, well, now you need 300 pieces of artwork. And they were like, oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So you said that you started playing other CCGs. Was there any other than Star Trek and Magic in that first sort of year and a half, that sort of 94, 95 sort of thing that really impressed you that wasn't Decipher?
I'm trying to think. I'm sure there were more.
On the Edge, maybe?
On the Edge, we played a little bit of, and we liked it very much, but we didn't really get into it because my circle of friends was my playtesters for Decipher as time went on.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, to explain exactly how I got the Decipher. Wait, I have another hat. Wait.
I need a musical cue for the hats.
Oh, yeah, right. I was on the Genie bulletin board. And when I say internet bulletin board, most people have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Basically a forum, like basically a proto forum, everyone.
Yeah. It's like a forum, kind of. So I was talking more about Star Trek with all the guys at Decipher. And Sandy Weibel sent me an email and he said, we're going to do a Star Wars game. Do you want to play test it? And what did I say? I said, yes.
I take it you were a big Star Wars fan at the time?
It was a cool movie. I saw it a bunch of times in the theater, but it did not change my life at 23. Anyway, so as Sandy said, you want to play test Star Wars? I said, yeah. So again, same process. They would send me cards. I have some cards. They would send me cards. And,
they look so interesting, the Star Wars ones. Those ones I've seen more recently.
Here's always my favorite. This is Saturday.
Oh my God, I was going to ask you about this. Oh my God. Okay. All right. This was stay for the fun stuff at the end. No, this is, I need people to know about this. So this is a card. Basically think about Magic's unsets. This is what this is. Do you want to explain what this is, Chuck?
Yeah, it says your own personal force is increased to 2 when it is Saturday.
Yeah. I don't know how they would have top-down themed that, like Life Day or something. I don't know, but
it didn't make it through the playtest, as we all looked at them askance, and they grinned really big and said, "Well, yeah, most tournaments are on Saturday, so it's going to be great." We were like, "No, it's not going to be great."
That is amazing.
We have Bullseye. Here's Bullseye and Wampa. These were, again, you saw the other playtest. These were very fancy and classy, for playtest print like this.
I guess the industry was starting to grow up by then, and playtest cards were starting to become a little bit more of a sure thing.
I think so, and I think that if you knew Decipher, I think everybody that works at Decipher would agree with this. It's very everything at Decipher is very pretty. It was prettier than everybody else's stuff. So the art department there was pervasive and excellent, and really did a great job.
Amazing. Well, I do want to touch on that when we get to the Star Wars conversation. Just before I leave this little playtest time, I just want to ask, I guess, a lot of games are going around. You said that you had connections to Mayfair. Did you ever playtest their CCG, the SimCity CCG?
Oh, yeah. I did playtest SimCity. And at one point you could send in like $400 and you would get a card for your game store. So we have a card for, again, games, crafts, hobbies, and stuff, because there were cards for locations, for buildings. So for games, crafts, hobbies, and stuff, there is a card.
Wow. So that was the game store that your wife was working at the time, correct? So anybody watching, I'm actually going to post a link in the description below, in the comments below, and that'll link to that card on a Twitter link.
I can tell you that we, like I said, I got this binder full of cards, and it's not organized chronologically, unfortunately, but we played everything we could find because we liked the card games, and we were always interested to see what was new. And the interesting thing to me is that I was never the guy. I mean, I spent 20 years as a game designer, right? Was I one of those kids that had copies of games I designed all over the house? No, I totally wasn't. My first career was as a graphic designer, which right when I came out of college, I moved to Indiana. I got a job there, and I did that until we finally got the offer to. Ross said, the vice president Ross said, "Would you like to come to Decipher and work in Norfolk by the Sea?" He said, with hyphens, like Shakespeare or something. And I was like, "Yep." So I called a family meeting and I said, "We're moving to Virginia." And they said, "Okay."
So that's what I want to ask you about. So you're starting at Decipher. Are you starting before Star Wars comes out or after?
I had play tested it, before then, but after. And I should talk about the earliest playtests. First of all, you're right. This won't be chronological when we get done. First of all,
we jump all over.
We had the here's your stuff, make copies and make printouts and send us your feedback, right? That was the playtest way to do it. And then they said, "Can you come out for a playtest?" And I said, "What?" And they said, "We want to fly you to Virginia for a playtest." And I said, "Okay."
Free trip, okay.
We got there and we said, "Okay, here's our cards. Go ahead and build some decks." And I built a deck, a dark side deck, which featured Darth Vader and the Devastator. And the rules for force training was you could force train anywhere you wanted to. There were none of these lightsaber things. We called this an unopposed battle. I'm gonna spend a force to start a battle here with Darth Vader. You don't have anything there, so that's 6 from your deck. So
direct attack.
So that first day I went 11-1 with my Devastator deck. I was called. That's how I got the name Devastator Chuck. So that first day of that playtest, I was by far the best Star Wars player in the entire universe, and everything went downhill from there because everybody that night had been thinking about, this is not right. This is not working. So the whole idea of unopposed battles was unopposed battle. There were like dozens of things that were written up on the board, like 15 or so. There was like, here's things we have to think about for tonight. We're like, dude, I just want to go to sleep. So over that night, everybody thought about stuff. Everybody had showers. Everybody had shower moments. And Mark Tuttle, he will tell you that he did this, invented force drain. He said, what if there were little force icons on both sides and you can only drain for so much there? You can only do so much damage. So Darth Vader, if he's in a place with one lightsaber, he only does 1 damage instead of 6. And everybody's like, well, that's stupid. And I said, my Star Destroyers don't care. That's stupid. And then we played and we were like, this is pretty good.
Yep.
So
It sort of balanced the game. That was
yeah.
great playtesting.
And we didn't play with any weapons, weapon cards,
Mm-hmm.
because the guys from Decipher told us we don't have to test these; they're working fine. And we all went, okay. Okay. So if perhaps you might think that weapons are a little undervalued or clunky, it might be because they were not part of our original playtest.
Right. Oh my God. Well, it was, let's just say that CCGs were in their infancy. It was, their second game. Yeah, we'll forgive them their sins in that point. But obviously the game has gone on to do legendary things since. So with all these clunky rules, eventually the game does come out. And like you said, you didn't start working there until after the game launched. As somebody who was a frequenter of a hobby game store at the time, one of the few that was around, there was not nearly as many at the time until CCGs really sort of got roaring and Magic took off. Did you organize any tournaments? Was there any interesting stories of like player interactions back then? Oh my God, here comes, cue the hat music.
It's Gold Squadron. I was in Gold Squadron.
Wow, okay, you're one of the rogues, the squadron, yep.
I was number 2. I was gold 2, right behind
2.
Kendrick. Yes, gold 2.
Wow.
Now I can tell you that I ran about 21 tournaments for Decipher. And if my wife were here, she would say, "No, you didn't. You played in them, and I ran them." And I was like, "Yes, dear, you're right." She ran the tournaments. I remember there was a particular question about an interaction between Tarkin and Vader, and when it would come up, the players would call me over and they would look at me with these big puppy dog eyes, like, both of them, like, "We don't care what happens. We just can't figure this out. So let us know how it works." So I said something and it was fine. And every once in a while, things were changing. So you might make a ruling, and I guess this happens today. You might make a ruling in a tournament next week. You go, I said about that one card. Well, I got more clarification, and that's not right.
Well, that's so interesting to me as somebody who came from being a RPG player. You were almost the perfect person to organize those tournaments. You sort of looked at it and said, what should this situation do? And all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, as your GM, I tell you that this is what happens. Carry on.
I can tell you that, almost everything was top down at Decipher for a long time, which is great.
Almost nonsensically.
The idea is you've got the Star Wars property. So I don't care how good your gameplay idea is, we got to have some, bookies or something. So that was my beginning, and that's really formed a very important part of my experience and skills, in that I was geared up to work on licensed properties. You give me a licensed property, I'll tell you the story about the Battlestar Galactica game later, but you give me a licensed property and I will make a game out of it, and it will look like the licensed property. That's what I do. But again, I'm not the guy with the tons of game designs laying around at home that I'm trying to fit into some game or something. So, it's hard for me to say I'm going to design a game right now out of nothing. It really is hard for me to do that. Anyway, I'm digressing. So let's talk about. Yes, I was running tournaments for Decipher. I had play tested New Hope, which I believe is where Attack Run came, blow up the Death Star.
Yes, yeah, the objective. Yeah,
whatever they were, I don't know. It was a long time ago. So a friend of mine had gotten a bunch of cards, and we were going to the first tournament where this was playable. Okay, and I said, "You want to know how to blow up the Death Star deck? How to blow up a planet deck?" Really, it was like, yeah. And I said, "Okay, you need this, and this." This is so freaking complicated. Nobody could have figured this out. But I had just play tested. I was like, "You need one of these." So we started the tournament, and he was playing some guy, and I don't know, like turn 5 or 6 or something, he blows up Tatooine. Well, the guy's deck only had locations from Tatooine. And he's like, "Well, I guess I lose." And I thought, wow, I should never, what have I done here? I should never have enabled this guy. So I asked the losing guy, I said, "What did you think about your planet getting up?" He's getting blown up. And he said, "Oh, that's cool."
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think has excelled with the Star Wars CCG. Yes, it is a game, but a lot of players feel like they use it as almost a Star Wars storytelling module. Something where they will play certain things and they're like, how cool is it that Tarkin has a lightsaber and is fighting to death on, Cloud City or whatever. It is one of those things that charm is just inescapable. It really does bring that RPG feel that a more honed, more, concise collectible card game wouldn't have been able to deliver. And something I feel as a legacy, I think it is fantastic that it exists.
The like if you look at the way, and again, I'm skipping ahead to Cloud City, but if you look at the way carbon freezing works, it's basically like you have to have the cards to do this scene in the movie and this scene in the movie and this scene in the movie, and then it happens. And it's like, and you had to go to Cloud City, you had to go to Jabba's palace. I think the only person you could freeze was Han. We would not design that game that way today, but everybody loved the stories, so they were perfectly fine with that.
Absolutely.
The Hoth playtest, which was before I became an employee, Tom Lischke by this time had become involved, as mostly Tom was an absolutely excellent player. We would play Tom as he would play testing and beat whatever he was trying to make, and then when it was tournament time, he beat all of us. So he was the #1 player in the world for a while. So he came as a playtester, and I said, okay. And he picked up, when we got there, he picked up the card Echo Base Operations, and he said, "Have you seen this?" And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, but it wasn't part of the playtest thing." And we talked to Jerry, and Jerry said, "Oh yeah, we just added that in. We thought it'd be pretty cool." And we were like, "Holy crap!" So that was a really good card, of course. So when I got back,
Famously.
everybody I talked to at the game shop knew that I was a playtester for Decipher, and they always said, "What's Boba Fett's ability?" I said, "I'm not going to tell you anything like that, so forget that." And I said, "Do you have a copy of I'm looking for a card called Echo Base Operations." And the guy says, "Yeah, I've got one." I said, "I'll give you a pack for that." He said, "What?"
Because you knew what was coming.
So Jabba's Palace was next, I think. And Jerry and I were working on Jabba's Palace. And Jerry said, "Here's a bunch of aliens, come up with stuff for him." I said, "Okay, cool." So I did. And that was fun. That was really the first big, input I could make. And my first most beloved project was the enhanced sealed deck, the very first one. It came with a cool little black box.
Yep.
And they said, "Do maze with toys. We've always wanted to do that." So the idea was a card, which was Han with his blaster, a card which was Luke with his lightsaber. It was a crackerjack idea. It was a great idea.
Yep.
So we did that. So I'd also designed a card. What set was this for? I don't know. I designed a card called Star Destroyer, one of my favorite designs ever.
Yep. Star Destroyer! Exclamation mark.
Exclamation mark. Because there's a point in Empire Strikes Back where Leia points out the window and says Star Destroyer, and she's pointing at the executor. Now, if you can't see the executor out your windshield, so the card was a dumb Destiny 7 card, and it said, "If you see a Star Destroyer, play this card and say, quote, Star Destroyer."
Yep.
And then you played it and you recycled it, and it was a 7, and you didn't care what it did. And the lore was something about Leia's force powers had developed to the point where she was able to detect things or something like that. It's on there. Lucasfilm is the best licensor ever, and I've worked with dozens, but they were just great. They would let us do anything we wanted, and their job, it seemed to me like their job was a traffic cop. It's like, name this guy, and they were like, "Do we have a name for this guy?" "No." "Okay, name that guy." "Okay, fine."
That's what we had in the intro. So, well, let me ask you about that then. So you were professionally involved with Star Wars and Star Trek at that time. And like you just said, that Lucasfilm was pretty liberal at the time about letting you sort of give and take and give characters names. Like you said, there is all that Jabba's Palace stuff. You got to name a whole bunch of background characters there. Do you want to tell me about some of your favorites that you got to actually give names to and give backstories to in that set?
I can tell you, let me go back to Hoth. When we went to a Hoth playtest, there were several AT-ATs, and I don't think they were called Blizzard yet, but one of them was called Chuck's AT-AT.
Yep.
Just for me, just for playtest, haha. So I thought, like, as a playtester, I was like, man, I got to give them some lore for this or something. And I made up lore about General Navarre, who was assassinated by his troops, an Imperial general who was assassinated by his troops. I don't know what it said. You can read it. Navarre is Raven, which is my dog's name spelled backwards.
Oh, wow.
Named a card for my dog. By the time we got to, there's a list of this on the internet. So, it's kind of odd now that I'm retired because I'm not worried about being fired. We got to the point where we were naming in the enhanced sealed deck product. There are 2 characters named Arliel Schaus and Charles Buchan. Charles Buchan is pretty obviously Kallenbach, if you look at that.
Yep.
Ariel Schaus is an anagram of Charles Lewis. Nobody ever gets that one. That's my first two names. So we had to name them something, and we send these off to Lucasfilm. And they're like, yeah, looks Star Wars to me. Let's go. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's the Wolfman kind of guy, right?
Yeah. One of them is the Wolfman guy, and one of them is the more Syrian guy. Yeah. So yeah, those aliens were crazy. That was fun. That was a lot of fun.
So Decipher was actually really good with that sort of stuff, weren't they? They sort of they really pioneered and developed that new space that Star Wars sort of came into. There was almost like a little mini movie running through these cards. Like you said, paint your face blue and all of a sudden you're a character. So tell me a little bit about the process. Decipher back then, because they could only work with the original 3 films and sometimes taking awkward pictures of background characters. Tell me how that art sort of came about to make these full-fleshed cards from a half screen of an arm or something like that.
Yeah, there used to be a story on the Decipher website of some card that had 3PO with his hands up like this. And like you said, one of them was blocked off by the edge of the image. And the artists at Decipher were fantastic. And they would add that in. They just basically draw it in. They were really good. The other thing about it was, for example, the Highlander CCG, which I loved and played quite a bit, had come out roughly at the same time. And of course, they had their images that came from, I don't know, VHS or DVD or whatever. And they look very dark, and the guys at Decipher were perfectly aware of the fact that images from movies or TV have to be brightened up and cleaned up. So that's why the Star Wars images look so very good. I didn't tell you about the film reel that we had. Right. Okay. In order to get images for we had actually got a copy of the first film of what is now called A New Hope, and we had a giant film editing machine because the film was like, I don't know, this big now. So 2 giant reels, and you would run through and you find the frame you want, and you would punch it out, and then you would take that, it would get scanned, and then go to the art department, get cleaned up, and that's how an image got made. So we weren't using DVDs or anything. So the funny thing was, as you ran the reels, I ran the film through the reels, it would go pop, pop, pop every time there was a frame missing. And when you got to the cantina, it was just like, because almost every image there was a character. So we pulled all those images. Every time a devil horn guy or hammerhead showed up, there was a frame taken. Yes, all those things. I don't know when they started doing the starships, but like the starships for the bounty hunters, and I now cannot remember the names of any of them. I mean, there was the one that looked like a stapler, and Houndstooth. Houndstooth was the one. Yep. The guys that already were Rob and Joe designed those things and made them in CG. And I said, the new Star Wars miniatures game, the Armada game, I think, that has miniature ships, has like the Houndstooth. And I told those guys, I said, look, you guys, you thought this up and made a picture, and now it's a playable figure in a game. That's pretty incredible stuff. That's amazing. That's the sort of stuff I was talking about. Like, that lore wouldn't exist without you guys at Decipher there. Like you said, Wolfman is now named after you forever in the canon. Yeah, that was cool. What a legacy. There was also something about the Tonica sisters, because I used to have a website back in the ancient days when you coded your HTML like a real man by typing lots of brackets. And I had like a whole page on the Tonica sisters because they were 2 characters on 1 card, and it was all very confusing for everybody. So I said things like, they don't like to go into sand crawlers because it's icky in there, and lots of stuff like that. So just as a curiosity, you said that Decipher had this giant machine that would spin through film reels and you would punch out the image you want. Was it just the Star Wars property you were using that for, or did Star Trek get used for that as well? No, it was just for Star Wars. And I think it was just for the first movie. I think by the time the second movie came around, the DVDs were high enough quality or whatever. It was a mess. But I mean, again, in '95, how are you going to get an image from a movie onto a card? So they said, oh, here's a copy of the movie. I said, okay. So after that, I think it was a lot easier. But while we were talking about creating lore, there was a huge contribution that sort of Decipher added. Jumping forward a little bit, when Reflections 2 came out, the set was literally subtitled Expanding the Galaxy, when people's faces were literally painted blue, like you were saying, to represent characters like Thrawn, all these expanded universes characters like Heir to the Empire characters, Timothy Zahn's characters.
Tell me a little bit about that process. Were you involved in that? What was that like for somebody who had been a fan since he was 23 years old to be able to actually see physical images come writ large of this property?
My own personal perspective was that I was one of those images, so it was very interesting. I was told that Mike Stackpole and Timothy Zahn were going to come into the office, and they were going to get their pictures taken to be their respective characters, Cornhorn and the other guy. I forget what his name is. Anyway, I have a signed card with them, but it doesn't fit up there because it's a big oversized card. So yeah, I said, great. I know Mike. I know Mike Stackpole. I met him back in Tunnels and Trolls days. I knew him for a long time. So they said, okay, here's what we want you to do. Take these two guys. There's a big Army surplus store in Denver, in Norfolk, in downtown Norfolk. I want you to go there, pick out some. We need some jackets and some like pins and stuff. So if you look at
regalia,
yeah. So we got all kinds of stuff. We had a great time driving around town, talking to these guys. It was wonderful. And we came back, and a lot of that stuff we used for their costumes. I was the Vigo, which most people wouldn't even believe because it didn't look very much like me at all. And Shannon Baxa, who was Mara Jade, she did her own makeup. So she was doing makeup on me to make my face all white, and it wasn't sticking on or anything. And they said, don't worry about it. We'll fix it with CG or whatever. We'll fix it in post. So they just took my picture, and I snarled with my mouth open and showing my teeth. And
that's amazing. Well, it's still, you are preserved in the Star Wars CCG forever. Now, you just glossed over there. You said that Sharon Baska, the one who played Mara Jade, probably the most infamous card from, well, not infamous, but famous card from that particular set. One of the most loved cards by the fandom. What was it like working with her? Tell me about her.
She was delightful. She was really excited about the character. I have a card that, not a card, 8.5 by 11 picture that she signed. And she just wrote like it's like when you're passing your yearbook around in high school, and there's always one person that writes like 4 paragraphs of stuff on it. It was like that. She's just terrific. So yeah, she was great. She's very enthusiastic about playing this character. And she did a great job and looked so much like what I thought, Mara Jade should look like. So yeah, that was fantastic. That was part of the things that we got to do at conventions and things, and meet people who, like I met Michonne Bourrier, who played R. Singh, and gorgeous woman and very tiny. You don't see her next to anybody else in the movie, but she was very tiny. And I remember seeing her a second time in a convention, and I said, we're gonna make another card for you, young Jedi. And she jumped up and clapped her hands and said, oh, that's wonderful. And I thought, wow, this is great. So everybody was very excited about it. I mean, it was Star Wars,
Yeah. And it was before there was so many Star Wars like there is today. There was only those 3 films to sort of be going on with. Obviously, Special Edition was coming out, which was one of the sets you worked on. But the lore was just the 3 films, and everything else you guys basically came up with, and authors like Stackpole and Zane came up with as well. What an amazing Wild West time in the pre-Disney years like that, right?
One of the curious things about most Star Wars cards is that they had a lore box. Almost no other game did that. So every time we had a card, it had to have lore. So, Jerry used to talk about, here's a picture of Tarkin saying that line from the movie. At the top of the card, the name of the card is the line he said in the movie. And the lore says, did you see that? So did we. What are you going to say at that point? What are you going to say? So yeah, we thought that was kind of funny, but Warren thought that was very important to have lore in every card.
That's fantastic. Wow. Well, you mentioned conventions there as well. Do you have any stories from conventions that you specifically remember from your time designing things like Star Trek and Star Wars, or anything from major tournaments or stuff that you would want to discuss that you can tell us about?
We can talk about the growth of a special edition. Special edition, at some point, got within striking range of the size of Premier, which I believe was 324 cards, something like that. I think if you look, you'll find that they both had the same number of cards. So we had added things. I think that's where we added the big objectives that flipped, and lots of crazy things. And at some point, the art department, well, I don't want to blame the art department. Somebody came up with the idea of, well, we can make character cards from things like shadows. And we were all like, oh, it's like, here's one right here. So if you look at the operatives from Special Edition, many of them I don't think any of them have a picture of a character from. We had a couple laying around because I mean we saved everything. So there was lots of operatives. There were operatives from all kinds of planets. I don't know how many there were. And so the development of the operatives, they were 1/1s that cost 1, and they added to your force drain, and they didn't really seem very much like a character that would be important for gameplay purposes. But in Star Wars, of course, you can put 30 of them in your deck if you like. So they became a problem really quickly. Now, here's another thing. In 1998, I guess, DecipherCon, as it was called by then, there had only been a couple, but 98 was DecipherCon. It was decided that special edition, I may have some of the years wrong, but anyway, special edition had
no, 98, you're right.
We had the cards, but they had not been sent through the distribution system. So we said, we're going to send like 3 boxes of cards to every player at World Championships, which is like, I don't know, 32 guys or something. I don't know how many guys it was. So they were, can you imagine coming to a championship and getting 3 boxes of cards that you've never seen before and trying to integrate them to make a deck? So I remember someone telling me that night, there were people walking down the hall saying, Kashyyyk operative? Anybody got any Kashyyyk operatives? So everybody was trying to trade for a group of operatives. I mean, if you could get 6 or 8, you were in great shape. So the next day, play started. There were people with operative decks. The operative decks were killing everybody quickly in a way that was obviously not good. And we had many huddles between the designers to say, what do you think about this? I don't know, does it look good? It got bad. It got worse. It got to, there was one guy who said, I'm not playing operatives. I'll show you guys. Don't worry, Chuck and Tom and Jerry. We'll make it work. And he, eventually he got knocked out too. So now the mood was not, hey, operatives are cool. I can't wait to play with operatives. The mood was, oh, this is bad. This is not good for the game. People were getting very surly. There were physical threats of like, well, if I find you in the parking lot, that sort of thing. It was really, really ugly.
Wow. So just to bring everyone up to speed. So at basically what is the World Championship for the Star Wars CCG, in 1998, there was basically these relatively untested cards released into the player pool almost exclusively to them. And they caused a little bit of a problem because they were a new type of card, a small little character that could just swarm every other player that there was, right? And the fervor of this World Championship, there's stakes on the line. People who have come from all over the world have come to play in this tournament, and the game that they know has been warped irrevocably. And the anger and the almost Lynch Mobbian effect is turning on the Decipher staff.
Yeah. I remember walking into, I had been somewhere else working at a Young Jedi tournament or something. I came back and the room was completely quiet. And I remember saying to Jason Winter, well, what happened here? Was there a fist fight? And he said, no, but somebody threw a chair. And I was like, okay.
Wow, physically threw a chair out of frustration for these new cards. Operatives. Okay.
So it was not a good day for the design staff, I'll tell you.
Wow. So so let's talk about you going back to Decipher with sort of like the most universal player feedback that I think any company probably had received ever for a CCG. What did that change at head office? Like, how did that affect how you guys dealt with Star Wars CCG moving forward?
There was at least one playtester, Joe Allred, who became a designer shortly thereafter, who had written us and said, these operatives are a real problem. You guys shouldn't do this. And we made a last minute change to operatives, and anybody who has been in the game design business and hears me say things like, we made a last minute change, or like, oh, no, that's not good. Whatever you did, it's not good. So we did something to boost the operatives right before they went out the gate. And I remember some of the people saying, well, they're just 1/1s, what could go wrong? And we were like, oh, we don't like this, but okay. So yeah, it was a classic example of making changes late in the process. Sometimes Bill Martinson used to say, I make changes at the end of the process and they're more informed, and I make good changes at the end of the process. And there's a truth to that, because if you've been working with a set for 2-3 months, the changes that you make at the end are often informed and good changes. But sometimes if something just comes out of the blue and you go, hey, that's cool, let's do that. No, you gotta test that. So yeah, I mean, obviously we tried to make sure that there's a lot more testing after that and more careful testing. There was a card that we had, I think it was in Cloud City, called Asteroid Sanctuary, and
again, another famous card that almost became a must include.
Yes, and again, because of Star Wars being the rules that it had, if you had like 30 of them in your deck, it would be a good thing. I remember Mark Tuttle and I testing this, and we had put like 10 or 20 in a deck, and we were like, oh, okay, fine. And one of us said, boy, if you had a lot of those in the deck, it could get pretty bad. And the other guy said, yeah, let's get lunch.
Okay, so I was going to say, just so everybody knows who's watching, unlike Magic or if you've played other collectible games, Star Wars didn't have a limit on how many cards you could include in a deck. And that caused several problems like the ones we've just talked about.
I mean, Asteroid Sanctuary not only got errated, but we had a trade-in deal, which I think was never done before or since, where you could send in your Asteroid Sanctuary and we would send you a new errated version. So that was crazy. But I found out about the deck because I got a call again from Sandy Weibel after the playtest. It's like the next weekend, and he said, have you play tested with Asteroid Sanctuary? And I said, yeah, we already tested with that. He said, okay, do this. Make a deck with 30 of this and 1 of these and 2 of these, 3 of these. And we made the deck, and I played it with my son, and I was like, turn 3, and I was like, oh, there you get this horrible doom-like feeling of, oh, this is bad. So yeah, so we got together and we got that fixed.
That's amazing. Well, okay, I'll go on.
We took a trip to Lucasfilm, in, I guess, I want to say 1999, but it might have been 98, to see episode 1 stuff and talk about episode 1 as a licensor. So me and Tom and Jerry got to go, which was amazing. So we went there. And we had a great lunch. Somebody talked about, like George was not eating lunch with us, but there was somebody there who knew George, and she told us stories about George and his neighbors. So that was pretty groovy. We were having lunch in the room where all the soundtracks were recorded by John Williams. It was a symphony recording room with big movie on one wall. Anyway, so we saw animatics and things of Jar Jar and stuff like that. And we were like, well, could be interesting. We didn't hear his voice or anything. So we were all, it's pretty cool. More Star Wars. This sounds great. We're going to make a great game out of this. So Decipher all went to see episode 1 as a group. There were, I don't know, 30 of us, 50 of us, I don't know. And most of us walk out of there not happy. I said, well, this movie's got a couple of really good parts. And they were like, yeah, well, So it was not a property that was a big hit with everybody at the company. And I said, well, let's do. We're already doing this Young Jedi game. I said, I'll work on the Young Jedi. That's fine. And they were all like, yeah, you do that, Chuck. So Young Jedi was originally designed to come out. It was supposed to be 3 sets that came out 2 months apart. Bang, 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 really quick. It didn't work out that way. I don't know what the spacing was exactly, but it was like 9 months before the second one came out. So there was some, it's like, here's Obi-Wan with green stuff, and here's Obi-Wan with blue stuff. And if you've been waiting 9 months for new cards, that's not the kind of new cards you were looking for. So in the third set, when the third set came out, we actually put game text on cards, which actually none of the characters had game text. So there were like, I don't know, 5 or 10, and people were like, "Oh, this is the most fantastic innovation ever."
Right. So let's jump back a bit. Okay, so you've got the Star Wars CCG game in the market, and it's obviously doing well. And you've actually had this amazing opportunity to go to Lucasfilm and preview what was the first new Star Wars film in over 15 years at that point. So your impression obviously of it wasn't great. At the company then, you had decided already that you were going to make a brand new game called Young Jedi that would appeal, like Lucas's film, would appeal to a younger audience. So tell me about how that came up. Like, was that something that you guys were planning before?
Yeah, I think that, the fact that there was a new movie coming out meant that we were going to make a new game. That was pretty much a given right out of the box. Unusually, there were 2 competing designs for Young Jedi. There was one by Raleigh and Tom, again, who had been involved with the company at some level, since the very beginning. And they came back in and did a design. And then the rest of us, me and Tom and Jerry and Bill and everybody, the other designers, made another version. We were competing versions. So now Riley and Tom had access to some character art from the movie. It was actually sketches of some kind. It was like for a coloring book or something, but it was in color. So their cards were in color, and our cards were in black and white. Our cards looked like Star Wars cards. It was like a Star Wars card. We pasted a picture, here's little Anakin on a Star Wars card, and they were all black and white. So they both had light side and dark side cards, of course. And so we had our playtest, and we said, look, we're on Tom have access to color images. We don't have that. Our cards are not going to look as good. So we did our playtest, and we said, what do you think? And they said, well, the cards aren't very pretty. I think that was a joke, but we didn't laugh very much. but anyway, yeah. So I think I don't even remember. I think that the game that came out, and I'm not trying to be nice about this, I think it pretty much included parts of both of those games. I could be wrong. I don't know. But we were pretty happy with the way it went, and it was good for kids. I can tell you that I played a tournament game against a 6-year-old who his dad had made the deck, and it had a bunch of really ultra rare cards in it and stuff. So I'm playing a 6-year-old, and I'm like, well, I don't want to crush this kid. So I played kind of held back, and and then he busts out like Darth Maul and Darth Maul's lightsaber, and he just cleans me out. So I lost to a 6-year-old as the designer of this game. So that was a very humbling experience. The other thing I can tell you about Young Jedi before we leave is nobody would play the tank cards. We like the tank cards very much. So I said, this is what we call, I believe it's called hubris. I said, I'll make them play tanks, I said, and I designed a card called Open Fire, which made the tank deck the most broken thing in the entire environment. And I went to the, it might have been the 88 championships, I don't know. But we went to the World Champions for YJ, and there was, 7 of the top 8 were tank decks. And I was like, okay, I think I've learned my lesson here. I don't know if I really did, but so I worked on Young Jedi then, and that was pretty much the end of. I worked on Enhanced Jabba's Palace and that. So then I was done with Star Wars at that point. When Young Jedi was wrapped up, I was done with Star Wars. One of my first experiences with a game that was ending, and how you talk to people about games that are ending, because you usually know 3 to 6 months before when they're ending. But anyway, so as we found out that we were going to lose the license, and I mean, everybody can see the timing on this. We came out with Jedi Knights at that point. Jedi Knights was had the 3D cards, had cards that you could view with a 3D viewer, which was amazing. And again, a lot of CG artwork from the guys in the art department, just fantastic stuff. I know that main characters were always a problem from the design point of view, because, and I used to, again, falling on grenades, I used to say, all right, here, I'm going to design a Leia and a Han and a Luke. And I knew that there was no way that those first designs were going to make it, because as you work more set, they had to fit into the set. They had to be different from previous ones. So they would go through lots of iterations. And I know that I think all the cards were CG in.
Yeah, so all the graphics were CG in it. Now, the question I had there, was that an original idea that came for Jedi Knights, or was that something that you guys were experimenting in with Young Jedi?
I don't think, again, from the very beginning of New Hope, there was CG going on in places you may not have known about. I mean, when you saw the ships and stuff, you're like, wow, that's new. But like good CG in a movie, it was used many times to fill in blanks or fix things or move things. So they were very facile with that. They were really good at that. Wow. And I think it was just something that they wanted to do, and they wanted to do something that would really kick this game, into high gear and give it something different. We got very little time to work on Jedi Knights, and if I look at the cards today, they look like they could use some editing.
Do you mean the text or the images?
The text. The images are great.
Yeah,
the images are fantastic.
Yeah.
The Leia
image, for sure.
Lucas sent the Leia image back like 100 times. They
right.
Were not happy with that. So they worked with it.
Wow.
They got it done. But we designed like 3 sets in like 3 months. All 3 of those sets were designed at the same time.
Yeah.
And there's a character whose name is an anagram of Alan Smithy.
Right.
Do you know who Alan Smithy is?
Yeah, he's okay. So for people who don't know, he is the filmmaking name or the moniker that they give when a filmmaker wanted to take their name off a Hollywood film. Famously, one of the biggest examples is Dune. The David Lynch film had an extended 3-hour version. That's actually directed by Alan Smithy, not David Lynch. So it's a moniker that directors used to use in Hollywood to basically remove their name from a project. I did not realize. I will tweet about that and link that again in the comments below because that is gold.
I think it starts with an N. I don't know. But again, it's an anagram. Early on, when we got into the anagram land, I went home and I got my Scrabble bag. Oh, yeah. And I can tell you that there are characters who I think were in Jabba's palace that were simply pulls from the Scrabble bag.
Randomized letters.
There was a guy named Fozek, Scrabble bag. There's a guy named, this is my favorite, Yoxgit, who's a ton of points in Scrabble. So.
There needs to be a special Scrabble variant where it's just Decipher's Star Wars Scrabble edition.
Well, you know, if you look at the bag, it has a whole lot of vowels. You know, it's designed for making words. It's pretty good distribution. And you make everything with 5 letters. That's pretty much how Star Wars names work. Yeah, that was fun.
So I do want to talk and commiserate with you over this one little thing. You guys were aware for a long time coming that you were eventually going to lose the Star Wars license. What can you tell me about that on the as an insider? Like, do you remember what the feeling was around the office? Because as you just said, you guys had three collectible card games in market, all branded Star Wars. So tell me about what happened behind the scenes, what the employees were feeling, what the top brass in the company was trying to do to retain that license. Do you have any memories from that?
So I don't know. I mean, it was depressing. It was sad. It was, again, the Jedi were not my religion. It was a really cool property, and I really liked the movies, but it was not, you know, I have this theory that whatever happens when you're 10, that is the thing. And if you saw Star Wars and you were 10, you'd be like, oh my God, Star Wars. So I was not that guy, you know. I don't know what I watched when I was 10. I watched like A Man from U.N.C.L.E. or something. I don't know what I watched. That was a long time ago. Yeah, so on the design staff in particular, we were told that we were going to get Lord of the Rings. And we were told if we were good little boys and girls and worked overtime and got rid of our Star Wars, you know, finished up Jedi Knights and everything, we would start working on Lord of the Rings. And Tom and I in particular, I think everybody in the company, but Tom and I in particular went, holy moly, yes sir, whatever I need to do, can I wash your car? Yeah, we were very, very, very excited about working on a Lord of the Rings game. And I think Tom, probably to this day, still reads Lord of the Rings every year. He said, I read the whole trilogy every year. I said, okay, all right, fine. So yeah, that was super exciting. Wait, I have a hat. That was super exciting.
Hat change music.
Yeah, this is not an official Decipher hat, but it has a German thing on here. It says Herr the Ring. Well, that's kind of, that was very
awesome. Well, as we move into the next phase of the episode, tell me, so you guys had heard that maybe you were going to get the chance to design something for Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, probably the most talked about movie that the end of the 90s, early 2000s ever produced. So tell me, in your very fancy hat, once you guys learnt about that, what was the process internally with this game, and what did you learn prior to the film coming out? Like, what were you privy to, much like you were with episode 1, what were you privy to about the Lord of the Rings film before the rest of us saw it?
We were told that if we could be in New York City on a certain date, we would be able to see, I don't think it was the whole first movie, but it was a half an hour of stuff with a lot of finished effects and things. And Tom looked at me and said, I'll drive. I said, okay. So that was my first trip to New York City. I have pictures of me with the Empire State Building and things. And we saw the movie, and it was fantastic. It was wonderful. It was great. And so we were we were already stoked, but we were super duper stoked at that point by the time we came back from that. So yeah, amazing. And we had to, they took our phones, and it was a very NDA type situation. When we went to see this screening, it was only for licensors, or, I don't know, only certain people got into the screening. So it was awesome. It was awesome. And we were just so excited. And as we developed the game, I worked on the combat system, which to me was supposed to be to echo a miniatures game, in the sense that if it's a miniatures game, you do things like you roll for pre-contact morale before, and then you have archery, and then you have stuff like that. So the phases of the game, to me, evolve like a miniatures game. And eventually there's the skirmish phase where you actually punch out each other. So that was the original plan. And Tom had the amazing idea of the Twilight Pool. And then the game became a journey, which was perfect for Lord of the Rings, as Randall on Clerk says, these movies are all about walking. You're right. All about walking, and that's what we're going to do.
Even the trees walk.
So it was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful time. And we started out at the beginning thinking, somebody said, like, well, who can carry the ring? And we were like, Frodo's the ring bearer. He carries the ring. And we're like, oh, okay. Are we going to make more versions of Frodo? And we said, yeah. That was one of the coolest things about Lord of the Rings, is that we started, it was the first time we did it. I think maybe other companies had done it, but there were many versions of Frodo. You could pretty much not swing a cat without getting a Frodo of some kind. We're going to get, there was like a common and a rare, and I don't know, there was lots of, and they were in starter decks. You can get them easy. And the same thing with the ring. Usually be 2 versions of the ring. So,
well, that was a real innovation that Decipher had, because with Star Wars and even Star Trek, some of the most iconic characters were rare. They were only available as the most high value items. If you wanted a Jean-Luc Picard, or if you wanted a Darth Vader in those early Decipher sets, you were easily forking out $50 because there was no other version except for the extremely rare version, which of course, when you're storytelling and playing a CCG that is based on one of the most iconic properties, you want those mains characters, and their toys sometimes, but the mains characters that you wanted to play. And this was a huge revolution, and one of the many innovations that I feel like Decipher really had with Lord of the Rings. So with the Lord of the Rings TCG, you also solved that mains problem, but you also solved another problem that had sort of plagued games like Young Jedi. It had plagued CCG, Star Wars CCG. The problem of having the 2 separate decks for the for the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force. In Lord of the Rings, everybody is playing both sides of the conflict concurrently. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about where those revolutions in game design came from?
it was obviously we were solving a problem in Star Wars CCG in the original set. The main characters, the ones you really wanted, were not only rares, they were harder to get than rares. Like they were like R1,
ultra rare.
Everything else was R2s. So what we would call an ultra rare these days. So it was a big problem. So we solved that with Lord of the Rings. It was it was simple to do. The only tricky part was balancing the different. I don't think anybody ever said, "Well, I'm not using that rare Frodo. I'm using my common Frodo." And no, it was pretty clear that we could make one that was serviceable and then one that was desirable at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was super important. And what else did you ask me?
Oh, just about the evolution of those mechanics. Like you obviously, with Lord of the Rings, you have this massive, huge revolutionary property, and you answer some of the questions that were left with your previous games, be it Star Wars, be it Star Trek. Especially another revolution as well is this sort of journey aspect to the game where you're going through the 9 plots and you're doing this Twilight and Shadow Pool back and forth. Do you have any insight as to where those sort of ideas sprung forth from?
Well, I should tell you that early in the design process, I stood up and made a speech, which is not something that people do a lot back then, but I stood up and I made a speech and I said, look, all of our games have Destiny draws. Everybody said, yeah, Destiny draws are great. I said, I don't want Lord of the Rings to have Destiny draws. And they said, but it has to have Destiny draws. It's a Decipher game. I said, no, it doesn't. And they were like, okay, maybe not. So that will come up later. But that speech I don't know if it was effective or everybody had already designed that. So, I like to think it was effective. The whole business with the Twilight Pool and everything, I was fascinated at how well that worked, and this journey concept, again, very, very top down, right? We could have made a game just like Magic CCG with Lord of the Rings guys on it, but it's just a completely different game, which there are systems that I'd like to see used again, and that would be the whole thing would like be one of those systems. There were problems with, early on, flooding. There was the classic example is the Lord of the Rings deck I still have, the single Frodo deck, the solo Frodo deck, where you and then you don't give very much shadow to the opponent because you don't have very many members in your fellowship. So you're basically choking them. They can't play very many defenders, which lets you move along. And you have lots of special Hobbit interrupts because you know you're going to have a Hobbit. Interesting thing about that game is if you chose these starting cards to go on the table, and you knew if you had to have an elf, you had an elf. If you had to have a dwarf, you had a dwarf. You had everything you needed. So I thought that was a real good addition to deck building, and of course, really good for property, of course. And I think the other thing that was amazing for me is that along with working on the Lord of the Rings game, which we were all very excited about, there was an additional point of being terrified because, oh my God, we're doing a Lord of the Rings game. There are billions and billions of Lord of the Rings fans who are dig really deep, deeper than we dig. And what if they're not happy with it? I don't know. So I had to come up with names. I had to come up with elven names. By the way, we divided things up between Mike Reynolds and Tom and I think. We said, what do you want? I said, and what does everybody want to do? And I said, I want to do the elves. That was the first thing I said. I want to do and then we're like, okay. And then they split up everything else. No. So I started making up names and stuff, and I got put in touch with a guy from the guys at the OneRing.net. And I said, okay, I have some encyclopedias and things. I came up with this word, and I think it means leaf warrior. And they would come back and go, yes, that's pretty good. Here's another dictionary, by the way. And the interesting thing about the Lord of the Rings fandom was a lot of these things are not Professor Tolkien never actually gave the word about how this was supposed to work. So I would say this means leaf warrior, and they go, yeah, sure, that's fine. And then somebody else would say, well, that's not right because blah blah blah, and they would show some other kind of construct or I don't know. And but these guys, they didn't get mad about that. They were like, okay, that could be it too. They were very accepting. I've never seen a fandom like this before. So I got to make up a bunch of elven names, and I which was awesome. I just love elves to death. And when I got to play the Lord of the Rings online, I also thought it was pretty cool that I typed in every name that I made up, and they were all already taken. Oh, that made me feel good. So I worked on Fellowship of the Ring. I worked on Realms of the Elf Lords because it was about elves. So I made some elf things. Oh, there's also an interesting thing that happened in the first game. I made a Galadriel that had something to do with cards on the bottom of the deck. Or there was another card, like Malin Tree or something. It was about cards on the bottom of the deck. I thought, well, that'd be a thing. So these two cards work together. Well, one of them got changed. I think it was Galadriel because mains get changed all the time. So they made this stupid Malin Tree card, looked at cards on the bottom of your deck for absolutely no good reason whatsoever. So that happens too, that you have cards that are designed to work together, and then one of them changes. And that's not good.
And now all of a sudden you've got this phantom limb of a combo just living out there. Yeah.
So you got to make sure you don't leave those orphans behind. Yeah. So I worked on Realms of the Elf Lords. I worked on 2 towers. The other thing that I found out was at some point we decided to make a faction because there was only so many bad guy factions we could make, We decided to make a faction out of the South Rounds, who were a bunch of guys, funny hats. I don't know if they're propeller hat guys, but they were one of those guys. So we were not allowed to read the Silmarillion. We did not have the license to anything in the Silmarillion. So I still have not. Everything I got from Lord of the Rings. I have written more in the lore of South Round cards for the Lord of the Rings TCG than Professor Tolkien did in the original trilogy. So I made up a bunch of stuff.
That's amazing. So let's just pause on that. Working through these collectible games, like I said in the intro, you have influence not just in that game, but forevermore in Star Wars, in Lord of the Rings, and another game we're going to talk about later, lore for these properties forever. That's an amazing legacy to leave behind. Regardless of whether the people still play the games, they will still learn about these characters when they're diving deep on the wikis or the encyclopedias for generations to come. That must be an elating legacy to leave.
They're going to learn about the legendary whirling attack of the South Rands, which I made up. So yes, it was tough because there weren't many images of these guys either. And we would have the kind of thing where there'd be an image of 5 of them, and that was like 5 cards. You know.
Wow. Well, that brings me to another point. Eventually, Reflections comes out, and Decipher does a very similar thing to what they had done before with Star Wars. They started to create images for characters that didn't exist. Famous examples of like Tom Bombadil and all that sort of stuff. And this time, they're not created in-house by Decipher, but created by Weta, the actual production company that was involved in LucasArts. Do you remember anything from that?
Yeah, it was so awesome. Again, along with Lucasfilm, the Weta guys were fantastic to work for. And they really wanted to do these things. I mean, you know, it's something that they always wanted to do. Some guy probably had Tom Bombadil all ready to go, and they said, well, he's not in the movie. And they'd be like, oh, man, that's terrible. So we helped that guy out. So that was fantastic. Another thing that happened during this period was that Worlds Apart, a company in Denver run by Scott Martins, was going to do the online version of Lord of the Rings TCG. Now, Lord of the Rings TCG was not in any way, shape, or form designed to be an online game. It was designed to be a face-to-face game with cards with lots of words and peculiar interactions. And I remember at some point we had a card, you know, and we worked back and forth, and we would talk to Scott, and Tom would talk to Scott mostly and tell him, well, I know what the card says. This is what it's supposed to do. He'd say, okay, we'll program it that way. So it was fantastic. They were doing a wonderful job. And Tom had made a card with the playtest name, Take That Worlds Apart.
Because they knew how hard it would be.
Yeah, it was very complicated. But the rules were, we do whatever we want for tabletop, and they have to figure it out. So so I met Scott.
Hey, hope you enjoyed the episode, but that was only part 1. Chuck will return in our part 2, and we discuss the other games he's designed, including the .hack trading card game, Mega Man trading card game, Battlestar Galactica game, and also the Wars TCG by Decipher. That was the rebirth of the Star Wars CCG's mechanics in an entirely original property. Fascinating stuff. If in the meantime you have anything you want to let us know, you can comment below, or you can hit us up on Facebook at CCG History, or Twitter at CCG History on Twitter as well. That's it. I can't wait to bring you the next episode. Also keep an eye out. We may have a bonus episode with Chuck going live where we discuss some of the unproduced games that Decipher had the opportunity to make but did not. There's some fascinating info there as well. That will be up in a few weeks as well. Another good reason to subscribe. Okay, that's it from me. Catch you next time.